Welcome everyone to the Food Systems and Nutrition Training for Business, the VGFSyN, we like to say, the Voluntary Guidelines for Food Systems and Nutrition of the CFS. And this is an outreach and education webinar. Welcome. Alrighty, so thank you everyone for coming. We'd like to welcome and thank you for joining this Food Systems and Nutrition Training for Business, an outreach event by PSM and CFS, with the benefit of a great panel of speakers that you will hear from shortly. To start, some light housekeeping. The event, as I've mentioned, has been recorded and will be made available to participants next week. By remaining on the webinar, you agree to being recorded. So we hope that that is fine. We invite you to use the chat function that you will see at the lower right-hand corner, I believe, to post any questions or useful information that you might have to share. And if there are any questions or comments, the host will be in direct contact with you. You also have the raise the hand function. As of now, you should all be muted, but if you have a question and are given the floor, please unmute yourself. As you know, due to these COVID times, we see each other less face-to-face and more virtually. So we're all used to these video conferences and some of the common hiccups. We have measures in place to help maintain the integrity of the call. So should there be a disturbance, please bear with us and we will restore the order shortly. So now, with that aside, in terms of housekeeping, it's my pleasure to welcome the CFS Secretariat, Mr. Emilio Colonelli. Unfortunately, Ambassador Gabriel Ferrero was unable to come during this part of the portion, and we know that he would have liked to deliver these introductory remarks and welcome, but we're very happy to have Emilio here. Over to you, Emilio.
Good afternoon, and first of all, I would like to thank the private sector mechanism for the kind invitation to provide the opening remarks at this training session. I'm Emilio Colonnelli, and I'm a food security officer in the Secretariat of the Committee on World Food Security, the CFS. And I'm delighted to be here at this event focusing on the CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. And the objective of my intervention today is to provide a brief overview of what CFS is, of what CFS does, and also to say a few introductory words on the voluntary guidelines that were adopted this year by the committee. The CFS, the Committee on World Food Security, is an inclusive international and intergovernmental platform of the United Nations that brings together a wide range of stakeholders to discuss, to negotiate, and to find consensus on global policy guidance concerning food security and nutrition issues. The committee was established in 1974. And it went through an important reform in 2009 to respond to the global calls for an effective and inclusive governance of food security, in particular after the explosion of the price crisis in 2007 and 2008. Using a multi-stakeholder and evidence-based approach, the CFS develops and endorses policy recommendations and guidance on a wide range of food security and nutrition topics. And one of the main features of the reformed CFS is represented by concrete inclusiveness for all interested actors in the policy debate. In fact, members continue to have the prerogative of the final decision, but they have to take into account the positions of other constituencies. And the committee is open to participants representing UN agencies with a specific mandate in the field of food security and nutrition, civil society and non-governmental organizations, private sector and philanthropic foundations, agricultural research institutions, and also financial institutions. Another key point of the reform was the creation of the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition, the HLP, which is the scientific arm of CFS. The HLP is responsible for the assessment of the current state of food security and nutrition, and also for the provision of scientific analysis and reports on specific policy issues that are then used to inform the preparation of CFS policy tools. Today, the CFS is the only intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder platform within the UN system which is dedicated to food security and nutrition. And in terms of governance, it reports to the UN General Assembly through the ECOSOC, and it reports also to the FAO conference. Colleagues, we all know that the situation is critical and that the challenges ahead of us are very serious. Hunger is on the rise with nearly 690 million people chronically undernourished and 130 million more being pushed into hunger because of the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. Overweight and obesity are on the rise, increasing the risk for non-communicable diseases. And in addition, healthy diets are out of reach for more than 3 billion people. At the same time, food and agriculture account for around 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions and are also the main drivers of biodiversity loss and soil degradation. And in order to address these challenges, it's crucial for countries to inclusively develop policy and institutional reforms. These reforms have to take into account all the relevant actors and all the relevant sectors, with a view to promoting sustainable food systems that are able to deliver healthy diets and also that are able to improve nutrition, while at the same time protecting biodiversity and the environment. And in this context, this year in February, CFS members have endorsed the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. These guidelines have been developed through an inclusive process that was informed by a report launched by the HLP in 2017. And the process that led to the endorsement of the voluntary guidelines saw the active participation and involvement of hundreds of stakeholders from different sectors, including a high number of private sector representatives that took part in the various preparatory meetings that were held in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Near East, in Latin America, and also in North America. A regional consultation for Africa was held in Addis in July 2019, while the one for Europe was held in Budapest in September the same year, in order to make sure that regional priorities, regional perspectives, and regional needs were reflected into the document. These voluntary guidelines represent a concrete tool in the hands of governments, of UN agencies, and other actors that provide guidance on policies and interventions to address malnutrition in all its forms through a holistic food system perspective. A holistic perspective that considers food systems in their totality and also that looks at the multidimensional causes of malnutrition. The guidelines provide a framework that brings together the various actors that are involved in the food system. A framework that recognizes that the various parts of the food systems are interconnected, that any action or decision to address one aspect of a food system would impact the other aspects of the same food systems. So the intention at the end of the day is to support the development of coordinated multi-sectoral national policies, programs, laws, and investment plans to enable healthy diets through sustainable food systems. This complex process leading to a global consensus on such a difficult topic would have been impossible without the leadership of a capable, tireless, and I would say also very optimistic chair of the negotiation process. So it's a pleasure to have here with us His Excellency Ambassador Hans Hoegeven, formerly permanent representative of the Netherlands to FAO and currently the independent chair of the FAO Council. So welcome, Ambassador. Considering his central role in the process, it's a great opportunity to have him today to provide an overview of these guidelines. Ambassador Hoegeven's presentation will be followed by a very knowledgeable panel to discuss regional food systems and nutrition challenges, and also to discuss the potential for business to use this policy tool. And the panel will start with Ms. Lawrence Ricken, Scientific and Standard Program Manager from the International Dairy Federation. Ms. Ricken oversees the development in international nutrition and food policies, while monitoring discussions on sustainable diets, on food systems, and also on technological innovations. She had a very active role as a PSM member during this policy convergence process. Joining us from Rome is Ms. Tineke Onema, Executive Secretary of UN Nutrition. So thank you, Ms. Onema, for joining. And we'll also hear from Ms. Els de Groen, Global Director of Nutrition Standards and Advocacy at Unilever. She has more than 30 years professional experience, of which 18 years in Unilever, and she has worked for all Unilever food and beverage categories in different nutrition management roles. She was based in the Netherlands and UK, in North America, and also in Africa. And lastly, we'll benefit from the insights of Ms. Bibi Giose, a food and nutrition security advisor for ODA NEPAD. So we look forward to the panel preparing us for a very rich discussion. And before I turn to His Excellency Ambassador Hoegeven, I know that the PSM team is ready to share a video on the guidelines. So thank you very much for your attention. I wish you all a very productive meeting.
Thank you very much, Emilio.
Hunger and malnutrition in all its forms, such as undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, overweight, and obesity, are a major global challenge. The latest report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world projects up to 811 million people having been chronically undernourished in 2020, amounting to a total of around 928 million people living in severe food insecurity. 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet, which will likely rise because of COVID-19. Malnutrition in all its forms also remains high, especially for children under the age of 5. Malnutrition in all its forms has profound consequences on people's health and well-being. It affects their physical and cognitive development, and it alters their livelihoods throughout their lifetimes and across generations. To reverse these trends, countries should develop policies and undertake actions aiming to transform their food systems to deliver healthy diets and improve nutrition, and protect biodiversity and the environment. The Committee on World Food Security, the CFS, is the foremost inclusive body for coordination, discussion, and formulation of international food security and nutrition policies. CFS recently endorsed its voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition to address malnutrition in all its forms through a holistic food systems perspective by providing guidance on policies and interventions, considering food systems in their totality, and promoting policy coherence between sectors relevant to food systems and nutrition, like health, agriculture, education, environment, gender, social protection, trade, and employment. The voluntary guidelines were developed by hundreds of representatives of governments, UN agencies, civil society, and the private sector, as well as financial and research institutions. They were informed by the scientific evidence of the CFS High-Level Panel of Experts on Food Security and Nutrition, short HLPE. The voluntary guidelines are the first multilaterally negotiated document of its kind on the connections between food systems and nutrition. They recognize the strong interlinkages between sustainable food systems and healthy diets. They call for interventions within and across food systems and their constituent elements such as food supply chains, food environments, and consumer behavior to improve their ability to deliver healthy diets and to generate positive outcomes along the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. They present agreed texts on key concepts such as healthy and unhealthy diets, nutritious foods, and sustainable food systems. The guidelines focus on 7 thematic areas: transparent, democratic, and accountable governance, sustainable food supply chains to achieve healthy diets in the context of economic, social, and environmental sustainability and climate change, equal and equitable access to healthy diets through sustainable food systems, food safety across sustainable food systems, people-centered nutrition knowledge, education, and information, gender equality and women's empowerment across food systems, and resilient food systems in humanitarian contexts. We count on all of you to use these guidelines and promote sustainable food systems that deliver healthy diets. Partner and collaborate with other relevant initiatives and platforms, and promote the dissemination, use, and application of these voluntary guidelines. Use them to foster and guide inclusive dialogues among different institutions, sectors, and stakeholders within the food system. The hunger and malnutrition challenge is worsening. The guidelines are a tool to address it. Use them.
Wonderful. So that was a video on the voluntary guidelines prior to the introduction that Mr. Colonelli provided to the CFS. We hope that helped you understand a little bit more about this unknown beast that we work with directly, but some of you do not. It's really helpful to have seen the video and understand a little bit more about the guidelines. And at this moment, we would have given the floor to Ambassador Hoogeveen. He unfortunately had come in earlier. I see that he has dropped off for some reason. We're working on getting him back onto the event. But what we'll do in the meantime is proceed to our panel of speakers. And that means that we will start off with Ms. Laurence Ricken from the International Dairy Federation. Happy to have you. But actually, before I do that, I see that Ambassador Hoogeveen might have joined. So sit tight in just one more second, Laurence. I know that you're used to it through all the negotiation processes. Just one more second. There he is, a man with many hats and a lot of responsibilities. We're really happy to have you, Ambassador Hoogeveen. And we have just projected the video of the voluntary guidelines, so you are in perfect time to speak about the guidelines, and in particular, the negotiation process and what you feel is useful to these guidelines for private sector. And of course, as Emilio had said on behalf of the CFS Secretariat, if it hadn't been for your leadership, we wouldn't be here today with this output and the opportunity to disseminate it. If Ambassador, you would like a few minutes and I can start with the first speaker of the panel, I would be happy to do that. Otherwise, we can get started with you. Let me know what you would prefer.
No, of course, let's jump into it. And it's great to be with you. I would say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as we now used to say with virtual meetings. It's great to be with you. And I think when we look to the voluntary guidelines, and apologies for being a little bit late, but I'm also preparing for the council, FAO council next week. But I think we have to learn several lessons when it comes to the voluntary guidelines, because I think at the end of the day, it has to go on our actions are our future. And when you look to the devastating facts and figures, we all know them. More people than ever are living in hunger and poverty. More than 160 million people increased to live in Hungary since last year. And we are way above 800 million. And we know that species are being extinct. And also here the numbers are rising at an alarming rate. We also know that 3 billion people don't have access to safe, affordable and nutritious food and healthy diets. And at the same time, we know also 1/3 of our produced food is being lost or wasted. So that raises, of course, the question, does it not make sense to radically change our current pathway? And we know that we have to transform our food systems. And I think we have a huge opportunity right now because we are rebuilding our economies and bounce back from the COVID-19 crisis. So this is humanity's big chance to really do something different and to really go changing the food systems. And we need to change, and we need it right now. And we have had the Food System Summit, which gave us a direction, but not too much in a concrete way. And I was always surprised, I'm still surprised, and that's so great why we have this session now, is everybody speaking, we have to take concrete action. But we have the voluntary guidelines on the food systems and nutrition. And sometimes I think, has everybody forgotten about them? Because nobody was during the food system, they were not referred to. And if you go to the voluntary guidelines, they are not all only, I would say, the first, and of course the complaint was that there was no negotiated outcome. Here we have a negotiated outcome. All 194 countries of FAO have agreed to these voluntary guidelines. And it is a systemic multi-sectoral approach. And I want to underline and highlight the multi-sectoral approach. It's not only about governments, it's also about the private sector, it's also about civil society. And we can do it only in a joint effort. But if you go in through the guidelines, you see how concrete they are, because if you look to the areas which are already presented, they are related to accountable governance. Accountable governance is not accountable governance only for governments, it's also accountable governance, I would say, for the companies, the private sector, and also for civil society or NGOs. It's about everything about how we can make what we always say, the SDGs, socio-economic and sustainable development, much more concrete, also in relation to climate change. You have concrete guidelines for companies, for governments, how at national, incorporating national circumstances, how to mainstream adaptation and mitigation in their policies, how to work also for the health of and the involvement of the food system workers, about packaging, about storage, about processing. And also when you look to the inclusiveness about youth access to food systems and their involvement. It's about equal and equitable access to healthy diets. I mean, it's everything how to make what we always say, our food more affordable, more adoptable, and more nutritious for everybody. And of course, it's everything about food safety. Let's not forget, we're not only speaking about food security, but also about food safety. And of course, that's crucial. It's about international standards, but it's also about international national cooperation. It's about effective risk assessments. And it's about, I would say, the establishment of control systems, concrete guidelines. Of course, it's clear that we cannot do without concrete guidelines on people-centered nutrition knowledge, education, and information capacity building. We often speak about gender equality, empowerment of women and youth. But here, for the first time, you see concrete, very concrete guidelines how to make it concrete. Not just say that we empower, everybody is in favor of empowering women. But I have seen so often in the UN system that we can make it concrete, and you can find it in the guidelines. And last but not least, it's also about when we speak to what's happening now worldwide in conflict areas, how to make those guidelines for food system nutrition concrete in the humanitarian context. But one thing is very much clear, I think, when you go through those guidelines, we can only implement them if we work with the companies, with the private sector and the companies. Because what we have seen now, and I think that's not only the outcome of the recent COP26, but also the outcome of the Food System Summit, the companies are the most needed partners to make it happen on the ground. It's about not only about your investments, it's also about your capacity, your resources to support real action on the ground. Speaking about market access, speaking about healthy diets, you know how to do it. And without your support and without cooperation between national governments and private sector companies, only then it can happen. And I know that we are working now, and I'm involved in it with some of the private companies in game-changing solutions. For example, when it comes to agri-tech competence centers in several countries, when it comes to global food waste, food loss facility, and when it comes for a new global framework for carbon credit system for farmers. I think that's the way forward. But that's why we need the businesses. We need your leadership as well. Only then we can really make a change, the change which we need. Our actions are our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hoogeveen. Indeed, our actions are our future, and we are hoping to provide some insights to private sector today and make sure that they are as involved as you were during the negotiations, and as many people in the PSM were too. So we're hoping to do that with this with this final session and also through the dissemination of the recordings and subsequent activities. So thank you so much, Ambassador, for providing this overview of the guidelines. And it really did give us a good understanding, especially in particular, the role of the private sector. And you've always been very, very supportive of our work. So we're very happy to have heard that from you. Now, I would like to pivot to the discussion of the opportunities and the challenges in the Africa and Europe region. That's who this session is tailored to, using these guidelines and what value they have. So now let me call upon our panel to get this discussion started, starting with Ms. Laurence Ricken. Over to you, Laurence.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, and thank you very much for those two first speakers who provided a very nice overview first of the guidelines, and then I would like to echo and thank His Excellency Mr. Bogavin about his point about the private sector. So it's my pleasure to talk to you today on the role the private sector mechanism has played in the development of these guidelines, as well as future steps and the outcomes. I would like to first start with telling you a little bit about the International Dairy Federation, so the organization I represent. So IDF is a leading scientific and technical expertise for all stakeholders of the dairy chain. And with over 1,200 highly qualified dairy experts in 43 member countries around the world, the Federation represents 75% of global milk production and provides a permanent source of authoritative scientific and technical information. And so IDF represents the entire dairy value chain at a global level. IDF has been following the work of the CFS for a while, but became actively engaged in the process around 2015. And that's when the committee worked around the role of livestock in the development of sustainable agriculture. And it's also around that time that CFS started to work on the food systems and nutrition as a theme. And so I think it was already nicely said by the previous speakers, but so the Committee on Food Security is one of the few UN platforms which provides that multi-stakeholder participation. And this is where we, the private sector, has our seat at the table. And therefore, the main objective for engaging in the process is to ensure the voice and the role of the private sector is considered, as well as to provide science-based facts to strengthen the work. So next to the platform of the CFS itself and the private sector mechanism, the organization that brings all of us together is really a unique opportunity for different experts working in the private sector, from multinationals to small and medium companies from around the world, as well as federations as mine, to collaborate, share knowledge, and to advance together on common goals like the ones that His Excellency just mentioned on the Food Systems Summit. So how does it work? So if we look specifically at the voluntary guidelines on nutrition and food system, the raison for today's meeting, we could state that it has been quite a process where the private sector actively participated from the start. And for that, I would like to take you back a few years. It was mentioned also in the high-level panel of expert report. And for this specific item, there was a high-level panel of experts on nutrition and food system, which was published in 2017. And so the HLPE report serves as a common, comprehensive, evidence-based starting point for the policy debates in the committee. And this HLP brings together 15 renowned experts in different fields and draws studies based on existing research and knowledge. And for the development of this report, a member of the PSM was selected to be part of that expert panel, and so showcasing that the private sector can be an integral part of the process and provide scientific input. The final report demonstrated the complexity of food systems and the many drivers which impact them, as well as the need to take a holistic and evidence-based approach. So after which the policy conversion process started to develop the guidelines on nutrition and food systems. And so a series of consultation and negotiations took place to arrive to the guidelines before us. In each of these steps, the PSM and its individual members engaged. So based on the HLPE report, we developed 70 policy recommendations, which we used as a roadmap throughout the process. So I'm not going to detail all of them, and you can find them on the PSM website. But I would like to highlight some of them because we felt particularly important to have incorporated in the end product. One that has already been mentioned is food safety. And so it's the importance to the guidelines to adequately address the topic of food safety and integrate its policy making with that of agriculture and health to achieve greater policy coherence to deliver safe and adequate quality foods. Stimulate the development and adoption of innovative practices to support the transition of all forms of agriculture systems to become climate smart, and therefore encourage governments to create an enabling environment and invest in research and innovation. Data collection and monitoring. Policy should be drafted based on data and sound science of food systems and nutrition. And then inclusion and women empowerment. Encourage policy measures and instruments that empower farmers, including in developing countries, and include women in the decision-making process. So I'm not gonna lie, it was a very daunting task to ensure all these elements are, as well as the role the private sector plays in the food systems arena, were captured in a constructive way in the guidelines. But really, by working together, we were able to navigate the difficult and sometimes challenging discussions on this highly complex issue, to which there is no one-size-fits-all solution. At the end, the PSM was content with the inclusive process, even in the challenging times of having the negotiation on a virtual basis, where we all needed to adapt our ways of engaging. And I assure you, it were long negotiations, long days. But the guidelines ended up to be balanced and supportive of holistic and evidence-based approaches. The role of the private sector, with numerous of positive reference as a partner and relevant actor, have been retained throughout the text. And they also acknowledge that the provisions in them should be consistent with other international commitments and obligations, multilaterally agreed rules such as Codex and the World Trade Organization. From a specific dairy perspective, we were very pleased to see the guidelines acknowledging the following elements. So the need for balanced text throughout the guidelines with respect to purported links between sustainable food systems and healthy diets, ensuring that recommendations remain focused on encouraging consumers to adopt and maintain balanced diets that do not directly or indirectly denigrate consumption of nutrient-dense whole foods such as dairy products. Replacing references about nutrients to limit in the context of healthy diets and throughout the text in favor of reference to overall diet quality. Removing policy recommendations that rely on or rank foods exclusively based on nutrients to limit. And prioritizing nutrition security and ensuring that the role of nutrient-dense foods, including dairy, is recognized, especially for vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, and pregnant women, who are at higher risk for food insecurity. Although the end result was a balanced text, compromise had to be found. And in that context, I think as a private sector, we would have liked to see further support for innovation and its role in improving nutrition within the final text. The guidelines remain averse to innovation, and where they are included, they focused on the risk associated with them rather than the numerous benefits. And secondly, considering the context-specific nature to food systems and nutrition, language could have been strengthened to reflect the farmer's perspective and the related trade-offs they will have to deal with moving towards more sustainable food systems. All by all, I would like to conclude that we do welcome the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, as these are a really good blueprint for governments to set policies to assist in the transition of food systems and for all stakeholders to consider how to engage. And that relates to what His Excellency just mentioned. We have those guidelines and we can work with them. It's something already very tangible. They clearly recognize the scientific and evidence-based needs to set recommendations and acknowledge the diversity and complexity of food systems, which require considering the benefits, costs, and trade-offs implicated in the transition. PSM has been engaging from the start and continues even after the guidelines are published, as shown by today's webinar. And it's been a long process, and we absolutely miss the opportunity to meet in person in that beautiful city of Rome. But we do really encourage you to take up those guidelines and move it forward and to join us in this multi-stakeholder platform.
Thank you so much, Laurence, for those insights from the point of view of the PSM active member that you were, and IDF as well. And it was great for you to highlight in particular what you saw of value and the long-winded and difficult path that led to that. So thank you for that. Now, let me turn to Ms. Steneke Onema, Executive Secretary of UN Nutrition. And we are very happy to have you here. And Ms. Steneke was a great partner and she was a partner throughout the convergence process. And it's been a pleasure working with her on many initiatives, including the monitoring and the reporting of the UN Decade of Action on Nutrition, which PSM was active with. And we look forward to working with her in the future as well. Over to you, Steneke.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, for your kind words. And do bear with me. There will be more reporting on the Decade of Action on Nutrition. So just wait for my email. So that's coming. But now we are here to hopefully contribute with a few remarks on the voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition. As Rosemary already mentioned, my name is Steneke Onema, Executive Secretary of UN Nutrition. And like the previous speaker, I think it's helpful if I quickly explain in a few words what is UN Nutrition, so that you know where my comments come from and you can place them. So UN Nutrition is in fact a new entity. It's the UN coordinating mechanism for nutrition. We were established last year as the result of the merger of the UN System Standing Committee on Nutrition, which you may know because it has been in the system for almost 50 years. So the UNSCN merged with the UN Network for the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement. So in the past, there used to be 2 coordinating mechanisms for nutrition in the UN system, and now it's just only one, and that is UN Nutrition. So what do we do? Well, in one word, it's one UN voice for nutrition. And in a few more words, it is all about joint advocacy for nutrition at all levels, as well as maximizing policy coherence in the several policy processes that are ongoing in the UN system, for example, the CFS. And in addition to that, advocacy and policy coherence actions, we really try to coordinate for effective and coherent and consistent joint UN actions in countries that are, of course, aligned with these global and regional policy processes. So in that context, we do engage with these policy bodies or governing bodies, if you wish, like the CFS, but also the World Health Assembly, UN Environmental Assembly, high-level political forum in New York, etc., etc. But back to the CFS. Earlier this year and also late last year, we were very active as UN Nutrition in the negotiations that led to the final adoption of these voluntary guidelines. And I believe it was really an added value to speak as one UN. Of course, we took the inputs of all the UN agencies. When it was a little bit more food system and agriculture related, it was really the FAO who provided the inputs. When it was a little bit more health related, we took the inputs from WHO. We also asked the members, either FAO, WHO, UN Women, and World Food Program, etc., to step in at critical moments in the negotiations to help out. And I believe, and of course, Ambassador Hogeveen can confirm that sometimes we were really able to help out in the negotiation with the technical expertise from our member agencies, as well as the scientific backing that sometimes just help the negotiations by checking with us, hey, people from UN Nutrition, does this still make sense, what we are discussing now? Because of course it's negotiations and you need always to cross-reference. Does this, what we suggest now as a recommendation as part of the voluntary guidelines, does this still make sense? So I hope that has been a useful contribution to the process. Also, as other speakers said, we had been involved as the former UN Standing Committee on Nutrition, also in earlier stages of the process. But I think this meeting, it would go too far to go back too far in that history. Also, in this process, with regard to the voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition, we have helped the FAO to establish a platform that collected all evidence that is available currently and that relates to food systems and nutrition. I'll get back to that point a little bit more. So it's, if you would go to that platform, you will not only find evidence and technical advice that is available through FAO, but rather through all relevant UN agencies. Okay, back to the guidelines themselves. It's very good to have them, and I'm not the first speaker saying so. It's the first one that really provides recommendations across the food systems. It's the first one that clearly links food systems with nutrition. So it's really a nice comprehensive package of recommendations in order to help transform food systems for better diets and nutrition. And it's a negotiated document, as Hans Hogeveen already mentioned. Let me add there, and playing with the words a little bit, but it is a negotiated document, and that "and" is very important, but the "but" is also very important for the simple reason the negotiations sometimes were so difficult and complicated, considering the many topics that were part of the negotiations, as well as the many actors that had a stake in the conversations, that coming to an agreed consensus across the board, across all these many actors, was not easy. So therefore, some of the recommendations, according to the point of view of UN nutrition, could have been stronger or more clear. And because of that, let's say, compromise text of some of the negotiations, some of the recommendations, the FAO, supported by the entire UN nutrition, decided to put on this website. So if there's still questions, or if you need more clarification, or if you would like to know more about a certain topic, a certain recommendation in the voluntary guidelines, you have this platform with additional scientific evidence. And we like to say, as UN nutrition, you need to use these voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition in conjunction with the technical evidence and also the normative guidance that is mentioned in the FAO platform. I see that there is someone in the chat who asked the link to the FAO platform. So when I'm done speaking, I'll try to type it, or maybe otherwise someone from the support team can do that. So that's one comment I would have. Another step in the process that is now supported by UN nutrition is, of course, to disseminate these guidelines to all our country contexts. I am happily sitting in Rome. Well, not even for real as we speak, but normally I'm sitting in Rome, and that is so-called sitting in a headquarters. But where these voluntary guidelines need to have impact is at country level. And we have used our country level contacts as UN nutrition to disseminate the voluntary guidelines with this explanation. Please use them in conjunction with the FAO platform that lists all this technical evidence, to have really all the knowledge and information at hand for you to support the transformation of food systems to work better for diets and nutrition. So now I'm speaking to you as private sector entities, and I'd like to call on you not to act as immediately in your function as private sector, because I am afraid then that you would then look immediately at the chapters that deal with the value chain, food safety, and how to shape the food environment to work better for nutrition, but also first take a step back and read all of it to get that complete picture. Because as I mentioned before, these guidelines are a comprehensive set, and we means me, myself, you in nutrition, you as private sector, governments, civil society, we all need to take a look at this comprehensive package and do not consider it as a shopping list. It's a comprehensive set of recommendations, and we need to work on all of them in order to make it work. And of course, then when you have delved into the richness of the full list of recommendations and the full depth and breadth of these voluntary guidelines, of course, you can take a more careful look at those recommendations that may be more relevant for you as a private sector company and that is active in a particular area of the voluntary guidelines, either in value chain or food safety or a combination of the lot. Let me check my notes here for a second. Yeah, and another call on you. So yes, do take a look on those specific areas that are of importance and of relevance for you as a private sector entity. But as I mentioned, also look, for example, look definitely at a broader scope. And I'd like to highlight one element there. How can we transform food systems for better diets and better nutrition? And for better nutrition. And there is one element there, it's only mentioned in one of the recommendations. It's part of the consumer education and knowledge chapter, I think 3.5, just from the top of my head, but do correct me if I'm wrong. And one call is there to prepare where relevant in countries where they do not exist food-based dietary guidelines. And that is a government activity. But I think you as private sector do take a look in your country, do take a look at these food-based dietary guidelines because they are extremely informative. They are informative to consumers to help them pick and choose, make the better choice for a healthy diet. They are also very informative to producers. So for you, either if you are a primary producer or later on in the value chain, to know what food and food products can be part of a healthy diet in a particular context, in a particular country. And that again can help and inform your actions. So do have a look at those food-based dietary guidelines that are relevant, that are active in your present in your country. So let me just finalize with one call for action to all of us to help together work on the transformation of food systems for better and healthier and more nutritious diets. But do take a careful look at the entire guidelines before you delve into the detail. Also, do look at the evidence platform of the FAO that was established in collaboration with many other UN agencies. I see the link has been posted online. And do make sure that you work according to these guidelines. I think there's a lot of opportunity for you as private sector to work across the value chain, to work within the food environment, to just help consumers make a more healthier choice for better diets and make those food products more available that really contribute to a healthy diet. So I'll leave it there and well, over to you, Rosemary, and maybe over to the audience for any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tineke. That was a really good insights to give a better understanding of the role of UN nutrition, and you provided a lot of concrete examples on how private sector could get involved and focused us in the right areas. So I appreciate that. So now let us turn to Ms. de Groen. Els de Groen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of our perspective on the importance of the voluntary guidance and how it can help us in our daily business. But first, let me explain, also like the other speakers did, a little bit about Unilever for you in the audience who may not know us. We are a large food and beverage manufacturer with a global spread, and we are present in more than 119 countries. So that is how we can make impact at that scale. Via our products, via our campaigns and so forth. We market much loved brands, and some examples include Knorr, our biggest food brand, Hellmann's, which is famous for its mayonnaises and dressings, ice cream brands like Magnum and Walls, and ready-to-drink iced teas under the Lipton brand. The purpose of our company is to make sustainable living commonplace, and we integrate sustainability in everything we do. We've just finished our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which was our guide for the last 10 years. And we've announced at the end of last year our new compass and future food commitments, where sustainability and the business agenda is now one fully integrated strategy. The overall goals of our compass strategy correspond well with the main topics of the voluntary guidance. It's about improving the health of the planet with goals in waste reduction, climate actions, and regenerative agriculture. We want to contribute to a fairer and more socially inclusive world with goals in inclusivity, diversity, equity, and raise of living standards of people in our supply chain. Improve people's health, confidence, and well-being with goals in nutrition ranging from increasing the offerings in plant-based foods, reformulation to limit nutrients of public health concern, and increase positive nutrition, which we define as, providing more vegetables, fibers in our products, as well as micronutrient fortification. Helping to transform the food system is at the heart of our strategy, and so we welcomed the initiative of CFS to develop the voluntary guidance, and also wholeheartedly. And as already mentioned by Ambassador Hogeveen and by Stineke, the voluntary guidelines are most likely the single visible evidence of global coordination and consensus to guide country governments in their policies and actions towards more sustainable food systems. For us as in Unilever, but for the whole private sector, it's important to be part of this multi-stakeholder process, as we can bring a unique voice to the table, often based on many years of practical experience in helping to provide options for healthier diets. Actually, Ambassador Hogeveen kindly referred to this as a strong element of the private sector. It's important to be part of the private sector mechanism and be involved in this process, as it sets the framework for food system transformation and nutrition guidance for governments, and therefore for the food systems we all operate in as manufacturers. For us, the voluntary guidance have many highlights, and I have read them fully, and I've been very much involved in the process. But if I have to pick a couple that are really outstanding for me, it's working in nutrition in Unilever and our actions in that, and the alignment with our compass strategy, I'd like to highlight a number of them and also explain why these are the highlights of the voluntary guidance. Now, first of all, the importance of transforming the food system to be able to provide food to people that is healthy, sustainable, affordable, and safe. As I just mentioned, I hope that came through, this is at the heart of what we believe in and the journey we have been on and continue to be on. The strong focus of the voluntary guidance on science and evidence-based approach. Everything we do in Unilever starts from the scientific consensus. And in nutrition, that is the WHO dietary guidance that is leading us in our product improvement agenda, where it is about limiting nutrients of public health concern, like salt and sugar, or whether it's increasing vegetable content in our soups or fortification with critical micronutrients in our bouillons. The ask for policy coherence. Policy coherence is essential to reduce complexity in a business. It's very simple, very practical. It's simply too costly to adhere to one policy and need to do something different for another policy. The strong ask for multi-stakeholder approach and an inclusive development of public policy. First of all, if anyone thinks they can solve the huge challenges we face in nutrition on their own, They have it wrong, or they simply don't think big enough. We need each other from governments, private sector, civil society, academics, all stakeholders to make it happen. And we sometimes see, or quite often we see, that private sector is not consulted in policy setting, and this has not led to better health outcomes. Setting stretching but feasible targets will move the needle, and we have ample evidence that this works. Only last week, a report was published on reformulation actions in my home country, the Netherlands, and it showed a good reduction of all the products or the companies involved in their salt and sugar levels of their products. A global scope and consideration for national food systems and dietary needs, as they may change, of course. This is essential in the way we set our nutrition commitments and targets. And let me illustrate this by two examples. I talked about reformulation for reducing the nutrients of public health concern. That is really globally implemented as it is relevant for every consumer across the world. We have one agenda and one global target. Improving positive nutrition in our products has also global relevance, but the nutritional needs may be different on regional and local level. There we look at what are the essential improvements we can make through our portfolio. So an example from micronutrient fortification. Iodine is a critical micronutrient for everyone across the world. So we use iodized salt wherever we can in our products and not non-iodized salt. However, specific shortages and deficiencies are observed locally. So for example, we fortify our bouillon cubes with iron in Central Africa, but we don't do that everywhere because that is not needed from a dietary need. Lastly, what helped our business with voluntary guidelines is again the science-based tone of voice in dealing with food processing. We see in some other debates a more polarized and emotional view leading to demonization of processed foods. But we need the benefits of food processing to provide affordable and safe food to all. Processed foods can help address certain aspects of malnutrition through fortification and enrichment. And we also saw during COVID-19, processed food ensured food availability, a greater variety of food, preserving nutrient content, and again, very important, food safety. I want to conclude by highlighting that the aspects that I now highlighted of the voluntary guidance, but many more are highly relevant to the private sector, whether it's a big company, a small company, across regions and different backgrounds and where you are in the value chain. Food and health policies rooted in strong scientific evidence is beneficial for all shapes and sizes of businesses and consumers. So again, please use them. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and look forward to the Q&A and hand over back to Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Els. That was really good to have a perspective of a large manufacturer, food and beverage manufacturer, but also the way you highlighted the value you see and the company sees in these guidelines, but how that actually is not only related to large, but all sizes of private sector representatives. And in fact, in order to address the problem, we need everyone on board, don't we? So it's good for you to have highlighted that. Thank you very much. And now I'm very happy to give the floor to Ms. Bibi Kiyose, the Food and Nutrition Security Advisor for NEPAD. It's a true pleasure to have you participating in this training session and considering, of course, your expertise, but also your work at FAO and regionally. So welcome, Bibi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rosemary as chair, and thanks everyone, all the speakers who came before me. You see, the beauty of speaking last is that most of the things have been said already. We have heard of the statistics. I don't need to repeat them. Some of the challenges have already been highlighted by the ambassadors as well as by my colleagues on the panel. So my short remarks are going to be basically trying to highlight what are some of the challenges in Africa and how we are wanting to address and also to promote the advocacy around the dissemination and the understanding of the voluntary guidelines. And I'm happy to say that I've been very much involved in the process of the development of these guidelines while I was both at FAO and after my secondment to NEPAD. So first and foremost, let me just remind ourselves that, since we are speaking to the private sector, it is the private sector that is actually at the helm of not only producing food, but processing it and getting it to the tables of those who need it. Therefore, we cannot do without a coordination, collaboration, and partnership as international bodies, as national governments, as regional economic communities, without the private sector. We need to be able to have a common voice, as Els just said, a common voice, and as Tenika said, because we have a global agenda, which we must all work towards achieving. So the private sector is one such that is very, very critical and responsible for ensuring that healthier diets are delivered to all who need them. That said, let me just highlight some of the connections or disconnections between the private sector and indeed government. There are gaps in knowledge and consensus around who needs to be doing what and how and to what extent. But the most important point to highlight is that good agriculture and good nutrition make the best business. So this we should keep in mind. And unless we have that outlook, we will forever miss the point of the importance of actually having that nexus or nexi of how we collaborate between the private sector, civil society, and national government. And then the second gap is in the training and capacity building. What are we teaching those who work in the government sector? And what are we teaching those that are in the private sector? So that there is a point of convergence, of understanding of what needs to be delivered. And the third thing that has been highlighted by Ambassador Hurvan is in the policy harmony and policy translation. There's not enough convergence, there's not enough harmonization, and unless and until we have that, we shall forever be missing the mark. And now, coming to some of the challenges that are really in Africa. You see, we obviously know that there are challenges around the three main malnutrition issues, undernutrition, meaning, stunting and wasting. We know that there's a challenge around macronutrient deficiencies, and I'm glad that Els made the point of food fortification. These are the iodine and iron, and amongst others. But there's also a growing challenge around overweight and obesity. Where I'm sitting right now in South Africa, more than 54% of women are obese. Now that's a travesty. And children are getting to that stage. And we cannot afford to ignore this challenge as long as we are practitioners, as long as we have the scientific facts, and as long as we challenge ourselves towards addressing the priorities in this regard. So some of the underlying causal factors of why we still find ourselves in a state as Africa of having one of the highest malnutrition rates globally is one, poor infrastructure in terms of road networks, transport thereof, in terms of water availability, potable water, in terms of the technological innovations. And when I say technological innovations, I'm not just looking at the most modern science, but I'm also trying to get us to understand how the traditions and how our cultures and how the indigenous knowledge systems have been used and infused to work with the modern innovation systems. And the third thing is, what is the rate of inclusion of those that are most vulnerable? And I'm glad that in the development of the guidelines, it is very clear that the neglected, the poor, the marginalized have to have a voice in developing and in contributing to these guidelines. And the coordination across sectors, comes as obvious. Every other sector is speaking to itself. Nobody seems to understand who's doing what. And unfortunately, COVID-19 actually exacerbated all the cracks that were already in the system and really glaringly pointed to us that we need to do business, unusual business differently. And of course, we just, from Glasgow last week, the climate change, the environmental degradation, that's a challenge for all of us. And in Africa, we now have civil strife in different regions, and that is obviously a factor in how we approach our policies and how we approach the security for around food systems, food security, and nutrition. And then another challenge is that of our governance and accountability. I cannot emphasize that enough. So there, given the above plethora of challenges, I would just like to highlight, the fact that the voluntary guidelines actually provide a great opportunity for us to grab and try to not only regard this as voluntary, but really want to translate them into workable solutions from wherever we stand, because every food system in every region is different. So it's different. So the guidelines are providing us that opportunity to customize and fully utilize what is at hand. So obviously, in terms of Africa, we have several opportunities where the guidelines can be used, effectively in our different platforms, to enhance the advocacy. So how do we do that? What are the opportunities? The first opportunity is that we have the Pan-African Parliament committees that we have been working with to popularize and to socialize these guidelines. Secondly, we have the regional economic communities such as SADC, COMESA, you name it. And then we have, been wanting to make sure that the private sector is included in this. And then we of course have the Africa Task Force on Food and Nutrition Development, where we've been working with the CFS in the development of these guidelines. Then we have the opportunity around the Africa Day for Food and Nutrition Security, which is the highest advocacy event for food and nutrition on the continent every October 30th. And then just coming out of the Food Systems Summit, you know that Africa was one of the few continents that actually presented a common position around what we want to see and how we're going to be moving forward, translating those commitments into actual actions on the ground. Then we of course have the AU Summit, and then the N4G is coming up, another opportunity that you must really grab with both hands. And last but not least, I just want to implore all of us to really think outside the box and recognize that, since our food systems are different, there's not going to be a one size fits all. So we need to really think through, how do we translate? How do we learn as the North and the South and the South and North, so that we can really exchange information, exchange the science, the innovation, and the understanding around this. So I want to thank you all, and it's been a great opportunity to share with you all my thoughts around this and where we're going forward as Africa. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you very much, Vivi. It is always wonderful to, first of all, have an all-women panel, but to have it concluded with such energy and wonderful insights. I loved how you highlighted both the plethora of challenges, but also the plethora of opportunities, and listed all of the regional avenues and channels there are to get these guidelines translated into action. So thank you very much, Vivi, for those words. I'd like to thank the entire panel for your complementary perspectives. And now I'm happy to move on to open the floor so that we can get our moderated questions and answers started for our panelists. So please do raise your hands or use the chat function available at the bottom of your screen to get this discussion started. In the event you are a bit shy, I could break the ice and pose a question to Else. Else, I was wondering if you could give a bit more information on the Unilever's commitments to nutrition for growth, that would be really helpful to kind of get a business perspective on how we can continue this discussion in that arena.
Thank you, Rosemary. Yeah. Nutrition for Growth is, of course, a very important summit that is coming up in now 2 weeks' time, 1 week time. We've been always involved in Nutrition for Growth and made commitments in 2013 around workforce nutrition and non-workforce nutrition. I don't know if anyone was in the launch of the Global Nutrition Report yesterday, but it's actually quite sobering data that were presented on the launch of the 2021 report, that actually little progress had been made in all the targets set out there towards the maternal and infant and youth nutrition, as well as the NCD agenda. One of the criticisms on Nutrition for Growth in 2013 was that these targets were actually not very smart enough. So it's now really a great opportunity that everyone registers their commitments via the Nutrition Accountability Framework, where there's a lot of guidance on how to do that in a really smart way, because it's the intention that we report on it every year. So what we've done is as business, there was the development of the Responsible Business Pledge, and that had a number of let's say, commitment areas. And we worked also together with other industries to see from where are the strengths for the commitments that we can make. And as Unilever, we have registered now 5 commitments. And these are in the area of reformulation, so on limiting nutrients of concern to address obesity and consequent NCDs occurrence or risk for NCDs. As mentioned, plant-based, in improvement in plant-based food offerings and in positive nutrition. So that's all around the reformulation angle. Then also you have a very specific commitment of our biggest food brand, Knorr, to help 1 billion people, or no, so now I need to check how many billion, but through our healthier eating campaigns, to get food that is good for people and the planet on 7 billion plates by 2025. And lastly, we have made another commitment in workforce nutrition, where the workforce nutrition scorecard developed by the Consumer Goods Forum in collaboration with GAIN is really good guidance on making very specific actions in your workforce on nutrition. So that is focused in our company on our factories where we can act directly to influence the food offerings to our employees. So yeah, and we're looking forward to the summit to share those commitments, because it's also to motivate and inspire others to do this as well. You know, you make one commitment, that's great, you know, so because by making commitments, it's a learning also, then you move the needle, you know, setting a goal out there, then you will make it, you will deliver it. So.
Thank you very much, Els, for that insights. And in fact, there's so much going on nutrition at the end of this quarter of this year. And we really hope that all of the work that has been done in the CFS arena is not in vain, and that insights can also be built on, and as they're so relevant. So I encourage anyone else to raise their hands or write a question in the chat. In the event there aren't any, I am very curious. I know that Laurence was very active during the Codex Alimentarius Commission last week, and there's always a need to speak about the importance of Codex standards for nutrition, for food safety, of course, but also the narrative and trying to shape the narrative of how they are useful for combating food insecurity. Laurence, do you have anything to weigh in on that, seeing as you're fresh out of the CAC?
Fresh out of CAC and working on the Codex Committee on Nutrition and Food for Special Dietary Uses, which is holding its plenary this week. So Codex has been a lot on our plate for the last time. And yes, I think point taking for looking at CFS and then also looking at Codex. Codex is one of these other platforms where you have that that place for it's called observers, so where the private sector and civil society can also wage into the discussion and provide a scientific basis to go forward. And from our specific point of view from the Federation, we have been involved quite heavily in Codex and following that through to securing evidence-based, but also providing that technical knowledge that we have from a sector perspective. We do work a lot on methodologies and implementation on those, help really put food safety at a high level in all of our countries and making sure that we give the tools to our members and working collaboratively on consensus basis projects to move that forward and we trickle that down into the Codex committees that look at that. So for example, the methods of analysis, CC-MAS, but food additives as well, to make sure that we help from a sector perspective to move all those agendas forwards. And I think there was a clear discussion last week at the Commission of the importance of the science-based and having everything around that, so going forward. So it's been good to see that CFS has acknowledged in the voluntary guidelines that need to consider those other platforms where the discussions are going forward. And taking back to Bibi's point of thinking out of the box, how can we make sure that everybody's aware of those voluntary guidelines and that we can push that through? I think the CFS voluntary guidelines have been mentioned in numerous occasions on those different commissions. So I think we really can push it in those areas as well.
Thank you very much, Laurence. I see that a guest has added a question and may be relevant to you as well. She or he says, I'd be interested to hear if any of the panelists are involved in school feeding initiatives and what that looks like in the areas where they operate.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one as well, and maybe other panelists. But yeah, so IDF has been looking at school milk programs around the world. So school milk programs are those programs that have been done in countries for the longest period of time. We specifically don't do that, but our members do. And so what we do is we share the good practices and we bring those all together. So we have a school milk hub on our website that provides all that data together so that people can learn from each other. And there again, to have sustainable initiatives, it needs different actors to play a role. So you have the role of the government, you have the role of the schools, but you have also the role of the private sector to help, and the farmers. And if done well, it's a win-win situation for different sections. So it's good. It provides healthy nutrition for those children. It helps them to stay at school. It helps the local economy. So school milk programs are really at the heart of really good example of how we can move those things forward. So yeah, I'll put in the link of our work. So we are heavily involved in that, and we are looking at participating in the School Milk Coalition. Going back, I think it's all a circle for the Food System Summit, being an active participation there.
Wonderful, thank you, Laurence. I see that Bibi has her hand raised. Over to you, Bibi.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a small to run commentary on the school feeding program. As you may all be aware, I mean, in terms of the AUD and NEPAD, we've had what we call a homegrown school feeding program that was developed jointly by the or by WFP and other partners. We started off with 12 countries. Now it has expanded to more than 30 or 40 countries across Africa. So where we are now is to actually just look beyond just having a school feeding or school meals program, but to look at the nutrient content and do the scientific analysis of what needs to go in there. So through the School Meals Coalition, of which I'm a part of, and part of the research consortium for that, we are working very closely with different partners to ensure that indeed appropriate school meals do reach all the children, of the world, of the globe, of the continent, in their specific, situations. So I just wanted to buttress what Lauren said. Yeah.
And thank you so much, Bibi, for that. I see a question in the chat from Ningua Monde to everyone. How will all these resolutions reach the common man who need this most? I think they are the most affected in the hunger crisis. This is true. Perhaps I can partially respond, and whoever from the panel would like to weigh in. But we all stakeholders at CFS, private sector, civil society, governments, and academia all have a part to play to disseminate and to build understanding on these guidelines. But of course, it takes all actors on the ground to make sure that this output of CFS is actually usable, available, and that people have the capacity to actually see value in it. Every country has its own context, but we're hoping that through activities such as this, there will be an increased awareness, and hopefully it will have impact. But your comments are noted and definitely valuable, we understand. Anyone else have any comment or question? Maybe while you do write it in the chat, I will note that this new CFS chair Ferrero, has been very active, and we are hoping that things and sure that things will be continuing in the path as before, giving greater relevance to all stakeholders and making sure that we're all involved in the process. But with respect to the previous question that Ms. Laurence spoke about in relation to Codex, we have seen a lot of greater activity between CFS and related to trade, and a identification of the role of WTO as a partner to CFS and many activities, and these have happened through trade dialogues and the understanding that trade can be a positive or have a positive impact on food insecurity. So it's been good to be a part of that discussion, and we hope that will continue. And there's a lot of connections to Codex in that regard. Unless there are any other questions, I know that there is a lot happening right now in Africa in terms of the CADAP conference. I wonder, Bibi, if you can provide some greater information on that.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, once again. I don't know how many people are aware of the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, otherwise for short known as CADAP. CADAP has been having its partnership platform since 2003. And today and tomorrow, we are having our conversations with our donor and technical partners, as well as the regional economic communities, and also the nation states, the African member states. One of the things that we are wanting to buttress in this partnership platform is the need to attain the nutrition and food systems targets as set in Malabo in 2014, following on the footsteps of the then Maputo Declaration of 2003. So we are working towards unpacking the Africa position and making sure that we land running, to ensure that, every child, every mother, every youth, every man on the African continent is well nourished, not just well fed, but well nourished in the ways that we know and to connect all the sectors and connect all the dots. So this is what is happening between today and tomorrow. Is a hybrid event because of COVID, obviously. So I've been participating remotely, but most of my colleagues are actually present in Addis Ababa. So thank you very much. And this is one of the things and one of the ways that we have always been reaching out to our partners out there to be a part of this commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vibi, for sharing that. So unless there are any other questions, I'm happy to provide some wrap-up remarks. I really think that it was a useful discussion today, and thank you for your time. It was great to understand the value that private sector sees. And as us, representatives of the private sector mechanism, we see a lot of value in these guidelines, and we hope that we have illustrated what there is in useful, what challenges there still are. As Laurence mentioned, there could have been greater reference to innovation, a greater understanding or identification that trade-offs are involved on the path towards greater sustainable agriculture. We understand the call to action from Stineke that we need to see the guidelines in a more holistic way, and perhaps not gravitate, which is a human nature, to gravitate towards those prioritized areas or priorities, let's say, for private sector. But it is a comprehensive text, and it should be read on the whole in order to garner and identify the value in them. I definitely think that is a strong call to action, and we will definitely heed to it. Also, it's very important to see how the concrete ways where a business is taking these guidelines and using them to reflect the commitments that they're making that are aligned to this and to their practices. So really helpful for all of you to make use of the references, the tools that were cited in the chats. And we are here for any follow-up that you would like. And we encourage you to reach out to us if you would like to get involved in any way with CFS and the active work streams that are underway right now, in particular gender and data and youth. And so you know how to reach out to us. And we also got a wealth of information of the regional opportunities out there from our panel speaker, Vibi. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you all for your time and hope to keep in touch. And a special thanks to the Ambassador Hugeven for his help, as always, providing an overview of these guidelines and being as supportive as ever on the path towards getting the uptake and encouraging uptake on these guidelines. So thank you all very much, and have a good rest of your evening.